Welcome once again. Welcome once again. This is Humanist TV Africa. This is Humanist TV Africa, and this is your host Kato Mukasa, a Ugandan lawyer interested in human rights issues, but of course interested in history, world history, and sharing that knowledge which we don't normally get in our classes. Now, this is Kato Mukasa, this is Humanist TV Africa, and in the studio to help me do the slides you'll be seeing is Dennis Bongole, based in Uganda. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Humanist TV Africa, the same name for our YouTube page, Facebook page, which is Humanist TV Africa. Now, Humanist TV Africa is for educating, informing, learning, and relearning. Remember, I always say that I'm a student in the school of life. Personally, I learn from you. Personally, I keep on learning. I keep on asking questions because that's how I was raised by my father, by my mother, and my grandparents. They raised me to ask questions. I was asking questions when I was a young kid. I grew up inquisitive. So we set up Humanist TV Africa to ask questions, to answer those questions, to find out what people think to be true. Is it true? To establish the truth, to educate is our number one priority here at Humanist TV Africa. That's why we take time to do research and bring you these researches so that you can be able to empower yourself. You educate yourself. Remember, our universities have not taught us these things. They have taught us so many lies in our universities. I learned so many lies in the schools I went through. So many lies in the schools I went through. Now, having said that, it's the reason why we have Humanist TV Africa here. And we are here to educate, to inform, to learn from you as you learn from us. This is Humanist TV Africa, and we have studios in Uganda, we have studios in Kenya, we have studios in Nigeria, we have studios in Zambia, Zimbabwe, we have studios in those countries so far. We have studios in Ghana, Kumasi, Ghana, Accra, Ghana. We have studios in those countries, and we intend to open up more studios in Rwanda, Burundi. We want to have studios in South Africa. We want to have studios in Egypt. We are an African-wide network that wants to share knowledge throughout Africa, but also share knowledge with the rest of the world. Because I know that people who are watching me right now are in different parts of the world. They're in the Europe, they're in the US, they are in Asia, they are everywhere. So we are not continent specific, though our focus is in Africa, but I want to take our knowledge beyond Africa because anyone can watch us. Now, this is African kind of history we share. This is humanism. This is a TV for humanists. This is Humanist TV Africa that is here to share with you, and we want to learn from you as well. It's the reason why we put a segment to learn from you. We are going to be asking questions from the viewers. We are going to be interviewing you on the streets of Kampala, on the streets of Kenya, Nairobi, in the streets of Abuja, Ghana, Kumasi. Of course, we shall be in Nigeria interviewing people live from the streets because we want to learn from you. And when we learn from you, you educate us as we educate you. Remember, iron sharpens iron. We learn from each other. Now, kindly subscribe to our Humanist TV Africa. Kindly subscribe to our YouTube, Facebook page. And of course, further the knowledge, share with it, share with others. Because numbers in economics, numbers matter. Today, I want to talk about one important thing in life, slavery. One important thing in life, slavery. As an African, I've grown up hearing that slavery was about Africans being enslaved in Europe, being enslaved in Americas. It's about Africans suffering elsewhere. It was a lie. Slavery was not about skin color, but power and money. This is the topic I'm going to discuss with you today. Slavery was never about skin color. Slavery was about power and money and glory and influence. Today, I want to wake you up from your slumber. Those who have been thinking that slavery was about Africans being enslaved, that was wrong. That version of Pan-Africanism is flawed. That's why I don't call myself a Pan-Africanist, because most of them are ignorant, they are racist, they don't know. Now, the true history shows that slavery was not about skin color. Slavery was about power. Slavery was about commerce. Whoever wanted to get richer got slaves. Whoever wanted to show that he has power, and I'm not using the word he has, not she has, because mainly they were men. Mainly they were men behind slavery. Now, whoever wanted to assert themselves at a certain period T, asserted themselves by enslaving others. Do you know that in Europe, the Slavs, SLV, the Slavs, an ethnic tribal grouping of so many Europeans called the Slavs. You can go in your Google, Google is a friend, and Google what I'm telling you. The Slavs were the most victims of slavery. The Slavs, people between Central Asia, people in Central Europe, people in Eastern Europe, Europeans in Eastern Europe, Europeans in Central Europe, people in Asia, part of Asia, people in part of the Americas today form that ethnic tribal grouping called the Slavs. There are so many Europeans that come from the Slavs. Just research it. Put in Slavs. You are going to see how big the population of the Slavs is. The Slavs were enslaved by their fellow Europeans. They were enslaved by so many people. They were enslaved by the Vikings. They were enslaved by the Visigoths. They were enslaved by so many other tribes. Europeans enslaved fellow Europeans. It was not about skin color. It was about who had power that time. Who had power that time? Who had the army? Who had the bigger empire or chiefdom? Would enslave others. To do what? To work for them. To do what? To inscript them into their armies, to fight for them. To do what? To dig for them. So Europeans themselves enslaved fellow Europeans for a long period of time. Before even they thought about Africa, they were already enslaving themselves. In fact, the word slavery comes from that Slav. Go and look for it. Slavery. It is coined from Slavs. The Slavs were the slaves. Slavery and Slavs. Slav and a big ethnic tribal grouping of Europeans spread all over Europe, and part of them in part of Asia, and part of them in part of Americas. They were the Slavs. And the Slavs were the biggest victims of slavery. The biggest victims of slavery were Europeans under that tribal ethnic grouping called the Slavs. They are well spread in Central Europe, they are well spread in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, all over Europe briefly. They were well spread there. They are in part of Asia and they have been part of Americans, the Slavs. That grouping was enslaved by many other fellow Europeans. The Vandals enslaved them. The Vikings enslaved them. The Visigoths enslaved them. The Slavs, white, they're not white people, Caucasian, Europeans enslaved by fellow Caucasian Europeans. Why? For power, for glory. The moment you are weak, as most of them were weaker tribal groupings, the bigger tribal groupings like the Vikings would defeat them. The Vandals would defeat them and enslave them right inside Europe. Before even they thought about Africa, Why is that it was not easy to enslave Africa? Because Africa was not Africa anyway, but I'm using it to make it easier. That time where Black people were, these were strong entities that were developing with formidable armies. That it was very hard to simply cross over to North Africa and enslave those people there. It was simply impossible because they had armies from the 4th centuries. They were stronger. They could fight. Now you find that from about 8th century to about 15th century, these guys in what we call Africa were much stronger. They were able actually to dominate much of Europe. Now that the Arabs had to negotiate with them to deal with them because Arabs also were already into slavery. But in fact, Black people, many of them from North Africa, many of them from West Africa, were so powerful that they have taken over the Arab Peninsula at one point. Black people had ruled over the Arab Peninsula. Look for it. And look for the countries that make Arab Peninsula. Look for Kuwait, look for Qatar, look for Saudi Arabia, and look for Iraq. Look for Jordan, Arab Peninsula, those countries that form the Arab Peninsula. Look at UAE, United Arab Emirates, those countries that form the Arab Peninsula. Those countries had been occupied by Black people from North Africa, from North and Western Africa. So Black people had at one point ruled Arabs. And by ruling them, it means they enslaved them. So if you think that slavery was about Black people, you are mistaken. In fact, Black people enslaved Arabs. Go in history, Black people enslaved Europeans. It was a matter of changing tactics, years changing, eras changing, powers shifting from one territory to another, from one territory to another. I will tell you many generals that were rulers in Europe, and you'll be surprised. Many Black generals that actually were rulers in Europe. Go in history and read. I know I'm talking to Caucasians who have read books, and now I'm talking to Asians who have read books, and Africans who have read books. Simply go and search it. Black generals that ruled parts of Europe. Put it in your Google search, you just get the names. Cadamas, Europa, and so many others. Black people ruling over European territories. Why? Because there was a time when Black Africa was so strong that it had overrun much of Europe. It had overrun much of Arabia, that it was very hard to enslave Black people. In fact, when the Arabs took over and began enslaving Black people, they called them Zanji. They called them Zanji. And they were fewer because Arabs basically enslaved Caucasians. I'll repeat it for you. Arabs basically enslaved Caucasians. You call them white people? I don't call them white people because they are not white people anyway. Now, Arabs, many of the victims of the Arabs in the earliest centuries were Caucasians, were Europeans. Arabs would go and invade much of Europe, the coastal areas of Europe, and take Europeans and sell them as slaves in Turkey. You call it Turkey. In North Africa, they get Europeans, they get the Slavs, that ethnic tribing, which is actually bigger, but was weaker. They were weak. The Slavs were much weaker. Get the Slavs, sell them as slaves in thousands and thousands in other countries. They are not countries, other territories. In North Africa, many Europeans were sold as slaves in North Africa. It explains later why there were many mixed people in North Africa, courtesy of slavery, because the Arabs had been surrounding weak European territories, kill people, and capture women, children, and weak men and take them as slaves and sell them to North Africa and sell them to the rest of the world. Whoever had money would buy slaves. So slavery was never about skin color. I want to put that on clearly. No one was against the black skin. No one. Slavery was about power. It was about money. It was about influence. Whoever had the armies at the time and wanted to expand, as long as you were weakling, they will come for you. Let me tell you something about Africa. You call it Africa, but it was never Africa. About the black people's homeland. Alikubulan, as they call it, which is again not a word for Africa. Let's talk about Kemet, the land for black people. Do you know that our own grandparents, our own ancestors had slaves in their own territories? That a kingdom like Buganda Kingdom was built on slavery. Buganda Kingdom was built on war and conquest. And I come from Buganda Kingdom, partly. Buganda Kingdom began with only 3 counties. And it expanded to over 10 counties. Where did they get the 7 counties? Through blood and iron. They conquered the Busoga, they conquered the Bunyoro, they went up to Ankole. Buganda Kingdom. Conquering Masaka area, where my ancestors are, was never part of Buganda. Budu Rwengo was never part of Buganda Kingdom. Buganda Kingdom was a small entity. We were never Baganda in my area. We were never Baganda. We were simply forced to become Baganda. We belonged elsewhere. Look at the history of Buganda. We were never Baganda. My ancestors were never Baganda. We are never Baganda at all. Buganda Kingdom had only 3 counties. But how did they expand to come and invade my ancestors, to force them to become Baganda, to force us to have Baganda names? Through war. We are never Baganda. So, because kingdoms could expand, kill the weaker ones, take them over, give them their own names, through a process called assimilation, kingdoms would expand. Buganda Kingdom was a kingdom built on slavery. That's why they made my people slaves. And others, the moment you were weaker, they would take you on. So if in my own kingdom there was slavery, why do you think slavery was about skin color? Slavery was not about the color of your skin. Slavery was about the color, and it was about money. It was about who had power. It was about who had influence. That's why I've told that even in Europe itself, there were black generals who ruled Europe. Put it in your Google and search it today. Black generals, black leaders that ruled Europe. Why? Because the Europeans were weak. And these black generals were stronger. Go and look at the history of the Moors from 711 AD. The year is 711 AD. Look for that year, look for the Moors and see how dangerous the Moors were. And where are the Moors? What does the word Moor mean? Black skin, burnt skin, nigger, Niger, black people, Sudan, black people, Moors, black people, black-skinned people. Now, look at the history of the Moors. And how many years did the Moors rule Europe? It's history. Let us educate ourselves. How many years did the Moors rule Europe? And the Moors were strictly black people. Some of them had been intermarried with Arabs. Therefore, they were mulattoes. Others were completely black people. From where? From North Africa. And from where? From West Africa. And look at that history and how many years did the Moors rule the Viscos, Visgoths, that tribe? How much influence did the Moors have over present-day Spain? I call it present-day Spain. Mark my words, present-day Spain, present-day France. including parts of the United Kingdom were under Moors, including parts of Scotland were under Moors. Much of Europe had been conquered at one point by these Moors, and were intermarriages, and they ruled for a long time. And the Moors were not Caucasians, never. These were Muslims who were either mixed with blacks and Arabs, Caucasians and blacks, or strictly blacks. Moors were a cosmopolitan. Some were completely black, others were mulattoes, a product of black people and Arabs, a product of Caucasians and black people. The Moors. Go and read about the Moors. You'll be interested to know. Look at the time the Moors were in Europe. The civilization the Moors gave to the present day Portugal. Look for it, not my word. Don't take my word for it. Simply put in Moors and Portugal, present day Portugal, Moors and present day France, Moors and present day UK, Moors and present day Spain. Put it in your engine search so that you can educate yourself and see how much these black people had, how much power they had during the so-called Dark Ages. Why were they called the Dark Ages? Because the entire Europe was under mess. They were fighting like barbarians. People have called it the barbarian age. They were fighting because of Jesus Christ. They are fighting stupid religious wars. They were so illiterate. They said that 90% of the Europeans in the Dark Ages never knew how to write and read. They were illiterates. In fact, bathing system, soap, swimming pools, libraries, schools, including a university called Salamanca, was introduced in Europe by who? By Moors. Street lighting, roads, agriculture, because they've been doing agriculture along the Nile. Moors introduced proper agriculture system in Europe. I'm on TV. You can go and research it. Bathing, soap, a university, Salamanca, introduced in Europe by Moors, street lights, mathematics, physics, alchemy, all those skills were introduced to Europe by Moors. They never had them. They never had that knowledge. They were busy fighting because of Catholicism. The Moors come 711 AD, they take them over. And they rule them for a long time until Europeans come together under the papacy. It was the papacy that saved Europe. It was Catholicism that saved Europe from the Muslim Moors. It was the papacy. It was Catholicism. They used to ride together to fight the Moors. 1491, that's when they defeated them. People had taken over from 711. They only defeated them in 1491. How many years did the Moors rule them? Go and research that. From 711 AD to 1491, they were ruling them. And when you rule people, you enslave them. You enslave them. It means that the Moors enslaved Europeans, ruled them, taught them agriculture, mathematics, alchemy, chemistry, physics. They introduced the University of Salamanca, street roads, street lights, better roads, better agriculture. All those things were introduced to Europe by Moors. Where did they come from? North Africa and partly West Africa. But we're a mixture of Arabs and black people, but also a mixture of Caucasians and black people. Those were the Moors. A very interesting history. I can mention to you about 10 important Moors that had influence all over Europe. Big names. The last leader of the Moors was, I think, Muhammad VII, who was the leader of the Granada, defeated about 1492, around there. And they have been ruling. Now, if a people rule you, what do they do to you? They enslave you. They tell you what to do. So when the British come up, later on, Britain is just a very, very young kingdom. Not the kingdom, it's a very young kingdom when you compare history. It's just recent. Just recent. When they wake up to fight and become so important, others have been there for a long time. I think the year is 925 when the first kingdom of the English formed their own kingdom. The year is 925 when the English formed their own kingdom. 925. Then ask yourself, where was this kingdom and the others? How come that they failed to fight the Moors? How come that they failed to combat the Moors? Because it was a time for the Moors. The Moors were stronger. They were Muslims, powerful, fighters, ruthless, murderers. Ruthless. If it's a war, it's a war. They fight to the death. So they take over and rule you. So the Moors had their own time. So because of that time, it was very hard to occupy Africa and force it into slavery. It was very hard. It was their time. But also time came when the Moors were defeated completely. When they are defeated, what happens? From the 15th century now, the tide turns and Africa, or Black people feel the heat, because after defeating them in Europe where they had come and conquered, they follow them up to North Africa and the rest of Africa. Now, slavery turns. They begin fetching them from wherever they were in Africa. West Africa mainly was the target, and they take them to Europe and Americas. The tide had changed. So ask yourself, when did the transatlantic slave trade start? When did the Silk route start? When you ask yourself those questions and get the years in order, you will know what I'm talking about. That actually, dealing so much in slavery from slaves from Africa began recently. There had been slaves in Europe. There have been slaves in Asia. There have been slaves inside Africa. So it's a lie for someone to say that Europeans enslaved Africans because they hated them, because that's a lie. These hopeless Pan-Africans keep on parading. It's a lie. It was about business. The tides had changed. Black people had enslaved Europeans. Black people had been part of the slave trade for a long time. And when the Europeans woke up, gang up under Catholicism, they are now becoming powerful. They are entities to reckon with. They invade everyone. Now it's time to also enslave you, because now they are building their own revolution. Industries are coming up. They need slaves for their plantations. What do they do? Africa provides the best ground. And remember, by now, Africa had been weakened. 16th century Africa, the so-called Africa, had been weakened. So it became a target. The Moors have been defeated. Who protected Africa now? The kings were divided. They were fighting among each other. The Zulus are fighting the Ndebele. The Baganda are fighting the Basoga. They are fighting the Banyoro. They are confused people. They are fighting within themselves. In fact, even in Africa, they are enslaving themselves. So what do? You enslave them. So the Arabs now turn over and say it's our turn. Because remember, Black people ruled Arabia. I'll repeat it for you. Black people had ruled Arabia. Black people ruled Arabia in history. So the tides turn, Arabs rise up, and then start to fight Black people and connive with the chiefs in Africa to take slaves to Europe. because Europe now has chased away the Moors, and Europe now is more stabilized, much stronger. Spain is much stronger. France is much stronger. England is much stronger. Now they are becoming more of visible kingdoms. I've told you, when does the Kingdom of England start? About 925. So now they have become more stronger. They have become more important. They need slaves. And where is the market? The market is in Africa. And who are they going to connect with? They are chiefs in Africa who are willing to sell these slaves. After all, Africans themselves are enslaving themselves. I've told you my own kingdom. My own ancestors were never Baganda, never at all. They were forced into Uganda, and as slaves, we were never part of Baganda, never. So when you understand that history, that kingdoms would always go after the weaker ones, they would always go after the weaker ones, then you know the history of the world. That whoever had power had the authority to enslave others. That the Slavs, who were Europeans, were enslaved by their own Europeans. So it's wrong to say that slavery was about people targeting black people. No. In fact, black people enslaved other people. So we have to stop telling these lies to the world. We have to be honest with ourselves and say it was about power shifts. Today you have power, tomorrow you don't have. Go and look for the history of Europa, Acadamas, people like Dagenham, people like those African black people that ruled Europe. Go look for their kind of history. Then I invite you to show us the slides, and then we see this in pictorial. What happened in pictorial? I'll explain to you the slave trade, the routes, and all that. Now, that was the Silk Road. The Silk Road was used to connect Europe to the rest of east, the east, from east to west. You can see Europe on one end, on your left, and you can see China on your right. You can see India, China. You can now see Africa down there, the Silk Road. Now, these are the Moors. These are the Moors, some of the photos of the Moors. The Moors ruled between the 8th century to the 15th century. The Moors ruled between the 8th century to the 15th century. I told you that the Moors only fell in 1492. The Moors only fell in 1492. They had been in power from 711 AD, ruling Europe. They were only defeated in 1492. Those people there, you see, they were purely people with the black blood. Some of them were mixed people, intermarriage between Arabs and black people. Others were intermarriages between black people and Caucasians. Others were strictly black people. You can see those photos of the Moors, when black people ruled the world. Dennis, give me a minute there. Hold it there for some time. I explain a bit of history there. But the Moors are also known as the Almoravides, and they were a group of Islamized West African people. Some of them came from Senegal, others came from Ghana, many of them came from Nigeria, others came from North Africa, Maghreb region, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, those countries, Egypt, provided the Moors. From Senegal, West Africa, to Nigeria, Niger, those West Africans formed many of the Moors. And how do they go to Europe? They go as fighters, they go as invaders. Which year? 711 AD. They were only defeated in 1492. Only defeated in 1492. In fact, they went there CE. They went there CE, not even AD. My history shows me that they went to that CE, 711 CE. Then they were only defeated in 1492. And when you look at their history, it's very interesting that they went and conquered what we call now today Iberian Peninsula, and captured the Visigoths. I mentioned about the Visigoths. Visigoths. It's a tribal grouping of Europeans or Caucasians. They conquered them, and it was an European tribe, of course. And then they took over much of the present day Spain. Actually, all the present day Spain was under them. And of course, they took over Portugal, the present day Portugal, that area which later became Portugal. They ruled southern France. And of course, we understand that they spread in many of the areas that surround, that border France, that border Spain, that border Portugal. And they made Europe of that time, which they found in Dark Ages. Go and Google the Dark Ages. And what did they do? They introduced what became the maritime nation of Europa in the 16th century CE. 16th century CE, mark the words and the years. They paid, and of course, they found Jews. Jews were slaves by that time. 16th century CE, Jews were slaves. They freed them. From who? From the Visigoths. The Visigoths, a tribal group in Europe, had enslaved the Jews. Who rescued the Jews? The Moors. The Moors rescued the Jews. Then let's continue with a few photos of the Moors as I continue talking about them, please. Continue the few photos of the Moors. I wanted to explain the Moors properly. Now, the Moors, what did they do? I explained what they did. They introduced streetlights in Spain. They introduced statecraft. They introduced, continue with the photos. They introduced organized agriculture. They introduced based it on the river Niger in West Africa, the kind of West African kind of agriculture. They introduced bathing houses. They were not bathing houses by that time. They introduced soap. They introduced, of course, farming, modern farming. And of course, as I said, they introduced a university called Salamanca, which is in Spain. It was introduced by them. It was also modeled along the University of Dijon in West Africa. There was a university called Dijon in West Africa, and they modeled Salamanca along the standards of Dijon in West Africa. And of course, that was from the beginning of the 3rd century CE. They introduced mathematics. Mathematics was introduced by the Moors to many of these European places. They introduced mathematics, and it was the numbering system, where someone was counting from Arabic method, Arabic system of counting. Those people there introduced to Europe from 1 to 3. That counting was introduced by those people in Europe. They built roads. They put street lights in Europe. Of course, they introduced alchemy. They introduced organized architecture. That was from about the 14th century. They were doing so well. They were also known as the Almoravides. I've been telling you they're also known as the Almoravides. But later on, they began fighting among each other, and they disintegrated. When I talk about the Moors, I also invite you to look for these names of people who ruled much of Europe. Look for a man called Cadamus, who was in Greece, son of Agua, son of River Nile. Look at Hannibal Barca, who was from Tunisia, 247 BC, son of General Hamila Barca. And look for Danaus, who was born in Kemet, Africa, in Libya of today, and what he did in Europe. Look for a name still, Europa, a sister of Cadamus, born in Phoenicia. Europe was actually named after her. You look at some of these are mythologies, of course, people have been fronting, but they are trying to show you that actually there were a lot of connection between Black Africa and Europe. There was a lot of connection between Black Africa and Europe. This is the intention of mentioning these names. They were called the Berber pirates. The Berber pirates. They used to call them pirates. Those Berber pirates. Berber is B-E-R-B-E-R. Berber pirates. They enslaved Europeans. They enslaved Caucasians. They were called the Berber pirates. And actually, it's also known that these people also made them sex slaves, which was actually not good. These Berber pirates would get Caucasian women and make them sex slaves, sell them as sex slaves, you know, during that kind of transatlantic slavery era. Mm? So, in brief, what I'm saying is that slavery was not done by Caucasian alone. Slavery was never done by Arabs alone. Slavery was done by many other people, including black people. You see, and the intermarriages of these people made it even worse. That they ended up ruling Europe for a long time. Look for names such as Charlotte Sophia, Queen of England, and find out if this person was a mulatto or not. I'm giving the name Charlotte Sophia, Queen of England. You can search it and see that Queen of England. Was she purely Caucasian, or she was mulatto? And find out how she became to be in England and how she became to be a mulatto then. Look for the name called Septimus Severus. Septimus Severus. And look for the contribution of Septimus Severus. What contribution did he make to present-day United Kingdom? The name is Septimus Severus. Look for that name. Then look for the name. Another name is Senwoseret. Senwoseret. Between 1971 to 1927 BCE, and look for its contribution in Europe. These are African Europeans. Look for Cadamus, look for Europa, look for Hannibal Barca, look for Danausi, and see their influence. Charlotte Sophia, and see. Look for Kenneth Macpine, and his influence in Scotland, but also look for his history, Kenneth MacAlpine. Now, these are histories of these people, histories of the intermarriages between black people and Caucasians, intermarriages between Arabs and Caucasians. The history of the Moors in Europe is a great history. It's a history of power. Power not based on skin of the person, of the bearer, but power because this person has the army. These guys there, you see, ruled Europe. If you didn't know this, now better now that they ruled Europe. Now, this is the Arab Peninsula. Then now we're going to move faster. The Arab Peninsula. Let me widen it a bit and I'll tell you what it consists. Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Oman. I've been mentioning these names before. You know, Sudan, Egypt, the Arab Peninsula. How it connected much of the Arab world. And who ruled the Arab Peninsula at one point? There were these black people who had gone there, and then later on Arabs take over. They also engage in trade. The Arab Peninsula. Look at that, Saudi Arabia, Iran there. Look at those countries. Again, I'm showing you Arab Peninsula and how Arabs were easily connecting to Africa. Look at it. Different technical plates. The Arabs was on their own technical plate. The Africa is also on its own tectonic plate. But look at the Red Sea, dividing them, the Gulf of Eden, dividing them, but also the trade that was in between Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Arabian Peninsula, that is Arab Emirate. Look at that stretch I've put for you there. The trade between Europe and China. Europe and China. You pass through China, India, Persia, Arab, Egypt, Europe, Somalia. Now, look at that trade that was there in that time. It was easier to move. There was the Mediterranean Sea there on your left, and then there is the Indian Ocean right there down. And then in the far left, you have China. So you can easily connect from China to Europe using that kind of route. Now, there was what we call the Silk Route, Look at how you connect one end of the world to another end of the world. Look at how to connect East to West Africa. That route was called the Silk Route. Find out how the Silk Route contributed to slavery. It made it so easy for people to engage in slavery from East to West. Why was it called the Silk Road? And why was it so important? Look at China, Shanghai, Beijing, and you move from China through Delhi, which is India, you move through Persia, Tehran, Baghdad, you move up to Egypt, which is part of Africa, Arabia down there, and then Europe. You can see Constantinople. We see the Romans there. Remember Constantine and Constantinople? Now that's the truth. Look at from Shanghai to Constantinople and Cairo. Look at that journey. From Shanghai, Beijing, you move through up to Europe, Constantinople, and up to Cairo. That was the Silk Road. That was the Silk Road. And it was used for what? For trade. It was used for what? For promoting trade. They are selling goods, they are selling animals, and they are also selling human beings. Look at that map. Look at the connection now between United States of today and then the rest of the world, the transatlantic route. What was the transatlantic route? You can see the Atlantic Ocean, the biggest, one of the biggest oceans, a very big ocean in the world. And that ocean itself has a history. Now, when you look at the Atlantic Ocean, it gets to give you the transatlantic slave trade. Now, look at Canada here. You see Americans here. And look what Greenland up there. Look what Iceland up there. And look what down here, Lisbon, Portugal. Now, you see that triangle kind of shape. They call it the triangle kind of shape, a triangular trade from Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Portugal down here, Lisbon, and then you connect to Americas. That triangle was used to do slavery. Thank you, Dennis. Let us continue. The transatlantic route. The transatlantic route. I give you again the transatlantic route much more clear. Now here I summarize it in a map. Transatlantic flights, 1919. Now I want to make it easier for you to get it. Now, if you use a plane, it becomes even easier. That we are going to fly from New York, USA to London or Great Britain. And you are going to pass across the Atlantic Ocean. But remember, Atlantic Ocean is too big, too wide an ocean. But when I'm going to fly, it looks as if it's easy. About 10 hours of flight. When I was flying from Uganda to US, I think it took me about 15 hours. Now, the flying has made it easier. But initially, then let us continue. Initially, there were no planes. It was the waters. It was the road to be used. Now, transatlantic slave map, this one is much better now. Let me explain this. Look at those red arrows. Those are the destinations. Look at Africa on your right, 1650 to 1860. That was the slavery in Africa. I've just told that there was no slavery until the 16th century in Africa. Africa trading slaves with Europe begins from 1650. So ask yourself, was there no slavery elsewhere? I've told you it was there. Europeans were enslaving Europeans. The Slavs were being enslaved by the Vandals, by the Vikings, by the Visigoths. They were enslaving the Slavs. Slavs are Europeans. But Africa was having its own slavery within. Let's leave them up a bit. I'm going to explain. Africa was having its own slavery within Africa. But the slavery between Africa and the rest of the world starts around 1650. Now, slaves are got from Africa from 1650 to 1860. They are got from Africa and are taken where? Now the map is showing you. They are taken to South America. Salvador, Paramaribo, Cartagena, that's South America now. They're taken to Brazil. About 5 million end up in Brazil. Now, they're taken where again? They're taken, where are they getting them from? From the Congo, who is my neighbor there. They're taken from Angola. They're taken from West Africa, much of West Africa. They're taken from the coast, see that coast, Sierra Leone, Senegal. Now, they get them from Senegal, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Congo, Angola, the coast. They are utilizing the coast. Remember, the ocean. The Atlantic Ocean, you can see it there now. And the Atlantic Ocean borders these places of Africa. Now, you are going to use the Atlantic Ocean to give us the transatlantic trade. Trans means cross over the Atlantic, transatlantic trade. Now, get the slaves from Africa who have been weakened, remember, the Moors have been defeated, 1492. Now you are going to capture them as slaves. Get them from Senegal. Remember, Senegalese had ruled much of Europe. Remember, I told you, West Africans who are the Moors. Now you have to get them back and enslave them. It was a tick hot. It was time now. Power shift has changed. You have made us slaves. Now we are going to come for you and also work for us. It was about power. Who had the power at what time? Now, they get them from there and take them where? To Europe. 5 million people, 3 million people are taken to Europe. They're taken where? United Kingdom, of course, and other countries. Now, where are they taken again? They're taken to West Indies. 4.5 million people from Africa are taken to West Indies. And then they're taken to New York. About 5 million people are taken to US of today. There was no America as we know it. It simply became known as America. There was the New World and all that stuff. Then they're talking to North America, had many slaves, and South America had so many slaves. New Orleans, Keystone, and all those places. Mexico City, about 2 million slaves from Africa were in Central America. And now you see the Pacific Ocean, the other side. About 5 million people of Africans were in South America. 5 million people of Africans were in South America. About 5 million people of Africans were in Brazil, Salvador. You know, those are the places. This map summarizes for you which African slaves went where and were from which countries. Many of them were from West Africa. And why? Because of the Atlantic Ocean. It was easier to ship them from that coast. Always they were attacking the coasts. Once your country was on the coasts, they were attacking it. Remember, it was easier to get slaves from Tanzania and Kenya than Uganda. Why? Because Uganda is landlocked. You had to travel them, you had to make them walk for a long distance, and they're going to die along the way. Yes, some slaves were got from Uganda, but they were very few. Many of them were got along the coastal areas because it was easier, capture them, put them on a boat, put them on a ship, and then cross them over. Then let us continue, brother. Let us continue. Yes, transatlantic slave trade from Africa to America, it had problems itself. I've been explaining this, the current, the waves and all that. This map arguments what I've said before. Here, I'm making this map much more clearer to you to understand the transatlantic trade. Trans means you are crossing the Atlantic. Now, you can see countries and sources of slaves. I've been mentioning this. Where did the slaves go in South America? Where did they go exactly? Look what that map is going to tell you where exactly they went and how many went there. Then let us continue because of time. Look at South America. Still, I'm showing you how many slaves went there and which areas. Dutch Caribbean, Puerto Rico, Montserrat Nevis, St. Vincent, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, British Guinea, Dutch Guinea, French Guinea, Antigua, St. Kitts, Virgin Islands, Dominica, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Barbados. These are areas where many slaves from West Africa were taken. Then let us continue. Those are areas of concentrations of slaves. There are many in those areas. Again, I give you another map to show you where they were taken. And I've told you the years and the centuries when all this happens. But again, the slave trade was affected by the winds. There were many winds that destroyed the boats. Many slaves actually capsized in the ocean. And one of the ships that took slaves to Europe and the Americas was a ship named Jesus. Go and look for that. A ship named Jesus took people from Africa into slavery. Then let's continue. Now we see Indians were made slaves, by the way. If you thought slavery was about Africans, you were mistaken. Many Indians were enslaved. You can see these images, courtesy of Getty Images. Courtesy of Getty Images. You can see these images. The New York conspiracy of 1741. They're trying to fight back. They're trying to fight back. Slaves want their freedom. Let's continue, brother. Continue. Continue. You see, the Polish people were put in slavery. Many Polish people were put into slavery. Don't ever think that slavery was about color. That's a lie. These Pan-Africans who don't read books basically parade lies. Oh, they were against us. No one was against black people. Black people forced themselves into slavery. Their chiefs participated, put them into slavery. And black people too also enslaved their own black people. And black people too enslaved Caucasians at one point, enslaved Arabs at one point. To never say it was about color, it was about power. Now, Slavs are slavery. I told you Slavs are Europeans. Go and Google Slavs. You will be surprised to know that Slavs are so many. Slavs are so many. They speak what they call this. Then give me a minute there. Hold it there. Let me talk about the Slavs now for the sake of the our viewers. They speak Slavic languages, and there are many Slavic languages. I can mention for you some. There are many Slavic languages. Now, the Slavs, as I said, speak Slavic languages, and there are quite many Slavs. And I'm going to mention for you specific areas where we can see these Slavs, of course. Now, when we talk about Slavs, we're talking about northern part of Eurasia. You're talking about Central Europe. You're talking about Eastern Europe. We're talking about Northern Asia and Central Asia. This is where you find the Slavs. Google it. You're going to find it right there looking at you. And who were the people enslaving the Slavs? Vikings, Vandals, 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 Lombards. When you look at Italy, go and look for Lombards. You will know what I'm talking about. Lombards, then the Varangians, then the Visigoths. When we talk about Europe, we talk about United Kingdoms, we talk about Spain, look for those. Then the Anglo-Saxons, who became also part of the powerful elites, the Anglo-Saxons. These are all people that enslaved Slavs. Slavs are Europeans. Slavs are Caucasians. They were enslaved between the 8th century and 9th century. By who? By fellow Europeans, by fellow Caucasians. And when Arab slave trade picked over, the Arabs also enslaved Slavs. I told you Slavs speak Slavic languages, and they're in northern part of Eurasia, they're in Central Europe, they're in Eastern Europe, they're in Northern Asia, and they're in Central Asia. Look for those people who are called the Slavs. But there are many different divisions of the Slavs, and they have so many languages. The Slavs are Europeans, are Caucasians. They were enslaved by Europeans. And later on, they were enslaved by Arabs between 8th century and 9th century. So it was never about people targeting Africans. No. The Moors take over Europe, 711, and they are only chased out in 1492. Look at those years. From 711 to 1492, the Moors were ruling and enslaving much of Europe. So when you look at, let's leave it a bit. When you look at the tax, for example, the tax enslaved Europeans for years. Tax, we call it Turkey. The tax enslaved Slavs for many years. One of the tax, look for a name called Molai Ismail of Martinez. Molai Ismail of Martinez. I don't think it was a Moor. It was more of Turkish. Had about 25,000 European slaves. Those people there had about 25,000 European slaves, and he used them to build what he called the colossal stables. Now, Arabs themselves went ahead and captured Caucasians or Europeans and forced. It was about power then. Then we continue as I summarize this one now. Then we continue now. I think I've given it justice. I've explained this properly. Then we continue very fast, brother, as I summarize this now. Yeah, slave trade was not about skin color, it was about power. Then simply continue. Black people under slavery now. I've told you, when are they becoming slaves? 16th century. Go look for history onwards. And before 16th century, where are the slaves? The Indians were slaves. The Slavs, the Caucasians were slaves between 8th to 9th century. Black people become more of slaves from the 16th century. Why? The Moors had been weakened. That's why. When the Moors are weakened, Europe rises up. And when Europe rises up, Europe must develop. Then they're going to look for an alternative. Where is it? It is in Africa. Now they are going to deal with Arabs. They are going to deal with, of course, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, all these guys. The Arabs are engaged in slavery. It begins from the 16th century, but slavery has been there from the 4th century. In fact, even before the 4th century, there was slavery. So don't ever be told a lie by these Pan-Africans who say, oh, they enslaved us. No, it was our time. It was simply our time, because we had also had our time elsewhere in Europe. I've given names of Moors who ruled Europe. I've given them their names, and where did they go? I've told you that. So it means that power had simply shifted from black people to Caucasians, from Arabs to Caucasians, from Caucasians to Arabs. That's how power was shifting. At one time, the Moors have the powers, so they are going to enslave others. They are going to educate them by force. They are going to teach them how to do gardening, how to study Arabic, how to do counting. Now, time changes, the Moors take over. Time changes, 1492, the Moors are defeated. Now, slave trade starts properly. Fishing people from Africa, take them to Europe from the 16th century. Then, for the photos that I will conclude. Now, these are slaves, of course, in America of then. I told you how racism started. There was no racism in this time. Europeans were enslaving Europeans. Asians were enslaving Asians. Black people were enslaving black people. There was no racism. I told you, when did the racism begin? Go and look for a man called Nathan Bacon and the Bacon Rebellion in America. How was that rebellion stopped? By creating a class of people called the white race. There was never a white race. It is a creation to stop Bacon rebellion, to divide people on the plantation as you see them. How would you divide them? Because on the plantation, I've been telling you, there were Caucasians on the plantation, there were Indians on the plantation, there were Japanese on the plantations in America. There were Irish people who were in slavery in America. How do you disorganize them? The black people who are slaves in America have combined forces with English people who are slaves. I told you that the English were slaves. Some of them who never had money went into slavery. Scotch people went into slavery in America. Irish people, where many Irish people are slaves on the plantations in America. How do you defeat them? Create a class called the white race and divide them, so that now the black people are not having the same powers as the Caucasians. That's how they introduced racism. There was never racism until when the Bacon Rebellion happened, led by a man called Nathan Bacon on the plantation of Virginia. Then we divide people and say, now you're going to be called white, when they are not white at all. So you call them white. So let us unite as we teach ourselves, as we know this history. It makes us stronger. We are one people. We are one people. There have been a history of slavery, but it was never targeted against Africans. Never. It was a matter of power shift. When the power shifts, the Europeans have it. When the power shifts, the Asians have it. When the power shifts, the Arabs have it. When the power shifts, the Moors have it. The Moors have it, they go terrorize the entire Europe from 711 to 1492. Look for those years, 711 to 1492. Moors, black people, terrorized Europe. But somehow they took civilization in Europe. They introduced the University of Salamanca. Look for it, where it was. Modeled it alongside the university in West Africa, Dijoni. Look for that. So they introduced agriculture, they introduced bathing places, they introduced street lights, they introduced arithmetics, they introduced writing, they introduced mathematics from writing from 1 to 3. It was introduced in Europe by who? By the Moors. It's history. Go and look for it. They introduced libraries, they introduced organized agriculture, done alongside river Nile system of farming. They introduced everything in Europe. Who are they? Black people called the Moors. Some of them were intermarriages between Caucasians and Black people. Others were products of Arabs and Black people. Those were the Moors. Their time ends 1492. The purpose has combined to defeat who? To defeat the Moors. The purpose had to combine forces all over Europe to come and slaughter. They killed Moors to chase them out of Europe. They killed Moors to chase them out of Europe. They had become a problem because they're the one with power. They had been there for a long time. So ask yourself, what were the Caucasians doing? They were under the Moors. And I've given the names of some of these people. So they had to chase them out. They combined under Catholicism to chase these Muslims under the banner of Moors out of Europe. When they chased them out of Europe, the Papa even writes an edict to kill them. The Pope of that time wrote an edict to kill all the Moors. They either convert to Catholicism or die. So many Moors who were Muslims were killed. And the rest fled back to West Africa, fled back to North Africa. So what do? The Europeans, the Caucasians, they combined forces with the Arabs and go there in the 16th century to bring them back to Europe and work as slaves. The power had shifted because after defeating them here in Europe, when they went back to Africa, they were weaker. They couldn't settle there. They were being killed. They had been defeated. So 16th century, now they began getting slaves from Africa, much of them from the coast that I've shown you, back to Europe and to the Americas. That's how slavery was. It was about who had power at what time. The one who was weak lost. The one who was strong took off. It was not about the color of your skin. It was about money, power, and glory. Thank you so much for watching us. Slavery wasn't about skin color. It was about power, money, and glory. My name is Kato Mukasa. This is Humans TV Africa, where we endeavor to teach, we endeavor to educate, to learn, and unlearn. I am sure today you have learned something. Please subscribe to Humans TV Africa. Dennis is going to put there the byline for you. Humans TV Africa. You find all these lessons here, well researched. You are welcome to challenge them with your facts. Welcome to challenge the facts I've given you, but at least you have been given those facts. Go and research, add value to what I've said. I want to encourage you to continue subscribing, to continue watching Humans TV Africa. We are here to share with you. We are here to learn from you. Give us feedback. We shall be happy. See you in the next one.